Normandy, June 1944. From the perspective of a German machine gun crew, the battlefield is a tactical problem, and they know exactly how to solve it. Their target is not the mass of pinned-down G1s, but the man with the binoculars, the American lieutenant. A single, precise burst. He's gone. Seconds later, a sergeant moves to take his place, shouting orders. Another burst. He's down too. For the gunners, the job is done. An enemy platoon, twice decapitated, should now be paralysed, leadless, ready to break. The gunner takes his finger off the trigger, listening for the inevitable silence of defeat. But the silence never comes. This was no anomaly. What happened in that hedgerow was a pattern that repeated itself from Normandy to the heart of Germany. A baffling reality for the Wehrmacht. Their doctrine was brutally simple and battlefield tested. Decapitate the command structure and the unit will disintegrate. Eliminate the officers and the soldiers will break.
Yet against the Americans, it consistently failed. Squads and platoons, having lost their lieutenants and sergeants in the opening moments of a firefight, were not paralysed. They reorganised under fire, held the line, and often counterattacked. How could a headless unit composed of former civilians continue to function? The answer lies buried in two profoundly different philosophies of command. To understand the German gunner's certainty, we must look at the foundation of his army's doctrine. For over a century, the German military was built on a concept known as Auftragstaktik, mission-type tactics. This wasn't simply encouraging initiative. It was a formal system of command that fundamentally altered the relationship between a leader and his subordinates. Under Auftragstaktik, a senior commander issued an order that defined the objective, the time frame, and the resources available, but it deliberately omitted how to achieve it. The mission was the what, not the how.
A platoon leader wasn't told to advance 500 yards and suppress a specific machine gun. He was told to seize a crossroads by 1400 hours. How he dealt with the terrain, the enemy, and unexpected obstacles was his responsibility. This philosophy was forged in the wars of Prussian unification and perfected in the trenches of World War I. It demanded that every leader, down to the corporal level, think like a commander. He had to understand his own mission, but also his commander's intent, 2 levels up. If communications were cut or the situation changed, he was expected to act independently to fulfill that larger intent. This created an army of agile, adaptive problem solvers. And because this was the world they knew, it shaped how they saw their opponents. From the German perspective, an army not built on Auftragstaktik must be its opposite. A rigid top-down hierarchy. A system they called Befehlstaktik, or order tactics, where soldiers were cogs executing precise instructions. They had seen it on the Eastern Front, where Soviet units often faltered when their commissars and commanders were eliminated. The American army seemed to be the textbook example of such a force. It was a citizen army, a vast industrial machine that had mobilized millions of civilians in a matter of months. In the eyes of the professional German officer corps, these weren't soldiers steeped in a warrior tradition. They were factory workers and farmers in uniform. Logically, such an army would depend entirely on its officers for direction. Take out the operator and the machine would simply stop. The theory was elegant, it was battlefield proven, and it was about to be applied with brutal efficiency. Now we return to that Normandy hedgerow to see what happens when this perfectly logical theory collides with a baffling and unforgiving reality. For the German machine gunners, the next few seconds should have been predictable. The crackle of American rifle fire would sputter and die. Then the telltale signs of a unit breaking, shouting, confusion, perhaps a white flag. They waited. But the silence never came. Instead, something deeply unsettling happened. The sound of the American M1 Garand didn't fade. It grew. The fire became more focused, more disciplined. The distinctive ping of ejected clips came faster, a rhythmic signal of methodical reloading. Dirt and stone chips kicked up around their emplacement as rounds snapped overhead with unnerving accuracy. They were being suppressed. Then a new voice cut through the noise. It wasn't the calm, authoritative tone of the lieutenant they had just eliminated. This was different. A harsh, gravelly shout, not an officer. A corporal, maybe even a private first class. He wasn't giving a speech, he was barking orders. Suppressing fire! Adams, Riley, on me! Move! A small fire team, 3, maybe 4 men, broke away from the main group. They weren't retreating. They were moving with purpose, low crawling along the ditch at the base of the hedgerow. This wasn't a panicked scramble, it was a classic flanking manoeuvre, executed by the book. For the German crew, this was a moment of cold, tactical shock. The hunters had become the hunted. Their entire premise, that a decapitated enemy is a paralysed enemy, was disintegrating before their eyes. This was not a fluke, it was a process, and it raised a terrifying question. What kind of system allows a headless army to instantly regenerate its command structure on the battlefield? The answer was not found in a grand strategic doctrine, but in the microscopic design of the American infantry squad. On paper, it was 12 men. In reality, it was an engine of redundant leadership, engineered for failure. This engine was laid out in US Army Field Manual 22-5, the Infantry Drill Regulations. The 12-man squad was not a single entity. It was built from smaller, self-contained parts.
At the top was the squad leader, a staff sergeant, but crucially, he had a designated second-in-command, the assistant squad leader, a corporal. This was the first layer of redundancy. Beneath them, the squad was split into 2 identical fire teams. The first, the Able team, was built around the heavy firepower of a Browning automatic rifle, or BAR. The second, the Baker team, was the manoeuvre element, armed with M1 Garand rifles and rifle grenades. Each fire team, while not having a formal commander, had an experienced private first class who was expected to lead it. This created a third and fourth layer of potential command. The entire system was designed like a modern electrical grid. If the main power station, the lieutenant, goes down, a regional substation, the platoon sergeant, takes over. If he fails, a local transformer, the squad leader, kicks in. And if even he is lost, the assistant squad leader and then the senior rifleman in a fire team are designed to carry the load.
The system wasn't built to prevent leaders from being hit. It was built to absorb those losses and keep functioning. The German gunner hadn't decapitated a snake. He had merely pruned one branch of a tree designed to instantly grow another. But a blueprint is not a building. The system only worked if the men filling those roles were capable of stepping up. This is where the second and perhaps more important innovation came into play, the mass production of leaders.
Back in the United States, at training centres like Fort Benning, Georgia, the Army was running the largest leadership factory in history. Non-commissioned officer candidate schools were churning out thousands of sergeants and corporals in intense, condensed courses. They learned map reading, tactics, and how to operate every weapon in the platoon. But the most critical lesson was not technical, it was psychological. The core principle drilled into every NCO candidate was simple and absolute. Assume command. If your superior is killed, wounded, or out of contact, you are now in charge. This wasn't a suggestion, it was a standing order. The doctrine of next man up was not a battlefield improvisation, it was a fundamental tenet of their training. They were taught that the greatest failure was not making a wrong decision in the heat of battle, but making no decision at all. Indecision was the true enemy. This created a deep reservoir of men who were not only authorised to take charge,
but who were conditioned to see it as their non-negotiable duty. This approach is often contrasted with the German concept of Auftragstaktik. But to call the American system its rigid opposite is a profound misunderstanding. The American army also relied on initiative, but it came from a different cultural source. It wasn't born from a 100-year-old Prussian military tradition. It was an extension of a civilian culture often called Yankee ingenuity, a pragmatic, bottom-up, problem-solving mindset. Where a German officer was trained to think like a general, the American NCO was trained to think like a foreman or a mechanic. He saw a problem, a pinned-down platoon, and used the tools and people at his disposal to fix it. He wasn't necessarily thinking about his commander's grand intent 2 levels up. He was thinking about how to get his men off this field and onto the next one. It was less a formal doctrine of mission command and more a culture of relentless, practical action. 2 different philosophies arriving at the same terrifying result for their enemy, a unit that refused to break. And the enemy noticed. The initial German reaction was disbelief, which quickly turned to tactical frustration. Wehrmacht after-action reports and post-war analyses are filled with grudging respect for this phenomenon. One German study compiled after the war noted with a sense of bewilderment that American units showed a remarkable ability to improvise and to continue to fight under junior leaders who stepped up after their superiors had become casualties. Another report from the 79th Infantry Division fighting in France complained that American small units were astonishingly good at reorganizing themselves for a counter-thrust, even after suffering heavy losses in leadership. This wasn't a legend the Americans told themselves. It was a battlefield reality observed and documented by their opponents. The German tactic of decapitation was meeting a foe that was more like a hydra. For every head they cut off, another seemed to instantly take its place. This interlocking system of squad design, NCO training, and a culture of initiative created an infantry force that was far more resilient than its citizen army label suggested. It was a machine built to withstand shock. But this resilience was not without a cost, and the machine was far from perfect. But the price for this resilience was staggering. The casualty rates for junior officers and non-commissioned officers were catastrophically high. This brutal calculus meant that the army was burning through its best leaders. The next man up was often no longer a seasoned sergeant, but a private first class with mere weeks on the line, thrust into a position of command with no formal training for it. This battlefield promotion kept units from collapsing, but it introduced a new kind of friction. Brave, localized attacks could become disconnected from the company's plan, leading to friendly fire incidents or exposed flanks. Costly victories were won by squads that no longer had a clear picture of the battle beyond their own hedgerow. The system wasn't a story of flawless design. It was a testament to a culture of costly, desperate improvisation that bent but did not break. And now this entire system, with all its inherent flaws and its terrible price, is about to be judged in a single moment of violence. We return to the hedgerow, to that corporal and the flanking manoeuvre he just set in motion. For the corporal, crawling in the ditch, the world has shrunk to a few yards of dirt and grass. He is no longer just a rifleman following an order. He is the source of the order. The abstract lessons from Fort Benning, Field Manual 22-5, the principle of assume command, have now condensed into a single physical choice. The German machine gun is just ahead, its fire still tearing at the hedgerow where the rest of his platoon is pinned. His two men look to him. Not to a lieutenant, not to a sergeant, to him. Their lives, the survival of their platoon, the outcome of this tiny, violent piece of the war, now rests on his signal. He waits for the gun to traverse away. A half second of distraction, a sharp nod. The three men rise as one. It is not a charge, it is an explosion of movement, a sprint of less than 20 yards. The corporal fires from the hip, suppressing, forcing the gunner's head down. Beside him, a rifle grenade arcs through the air, landing just beyond the emplacement. The concussion is followed by the immediate, frantic work of rifles at close range. And then, the hammering of the MG42 stops. Silence. The threat is gone. The corporal gestures for the rest of the platoon to move up. The flanking manoeuvre, executed by a leader who didn't exist 3 minutes ago, has worked.
The platoon can now advance to the next hedgerow. One tiny objective has been taken. The German strategy of decapitation was brutally logical, it was battlefield proven, and against the American army it was based on a catastrophic miscalculation, not a failure of spies or reconnaissance, but a failure of cultural and organisational understanding. The Wehrmacht's leadership saw a citizen army and assumed a fragile, top-down machine. They aimed for the operator, believing the machine would then stop. What they encountered was not a machine, but something closer to a biological system, an organism with a distributed nervous system engineered to absorb shock and regenerate. The American squad's redundant design and the NCO Corps' ingrained duty to assume command acted as a system's self-repair mechanism. This grinding resilience, paid for with the lives of tens of thousands of junior leaders, was a decisive factor that German doctrine could not counter.
It transformed what should have been tactical victories for the defence into a slow, unstoppable advance for the Allies. German doctrine was built on a simple, proven principle. To kill the snake, you cut off its head. It was a fatal miscalculation. They had spent years perfecting a tactic to fight a snake, only to discover, hedgerow by bloody hedgerow, that they were facing a hydra.